given inheritance rights at the time. The Prophet saying that man has right over woman as a woman has right over man. So, I mean, imagine at that stage, and then of course freeing the slaves. Slavery was, first time the Prophet spoke about how you have first to treat them equal, but the best thing is to free a slave. Now these were, at that time, dynamic concepts. And unfortunately, and then of course his last sermon, where he said, we're all children of Adam. We're all equal. I mean, whatever the color of our skin. So remember, these are 100 years ago, great concepts, modern concepts. But sadly, sitting right now in Pakistan, and I'm afraid for the last 70 years, we have not even remotely come close to these principles.
Answer, this is Dr. Moeed. Please, if you can hear me.
Ji, Moeed.
It's a privilege to be listening to you in a live space. I had the opportunity of seeing you almost every week till July, before I left, June or July or August. But I watched your interview with Tim Sebastian, and like many other interviews which you have given to Western media. And I'm mortified and surprised that someone like you is a modern man who talks of Britain, NHS, Scandinavian countries, Nelson Mandela, European history, and American history, is very easily tagged as a pro-Taliban, as a medieval, primitive mindset. What have you done wrong to send this impression? I really fail to understand. What have you done wrong?
Well, Moeed, look, good thing you're not here, otherwise you would be behind bars right now. So good that you've got away. Look, Moeed, I think in the Western press, the portrayal of Islam is, ever since that Iranian revolution of Ayatollah Khomeini, the portrayal of Islam was that they divided Muslims between two categories, fundamentalists and sort of liberals. So Muslims who looked like Westerners became moderates or liberals, and then anyone who was perceived to be religious sort of became a fundamentalist. So it was a bizarre categorization of 1.5 billion people on this earth. And this really started, I can remember after 1979, the fear in the Western countries was that the whole Muslim world would be swamped by Islamic revolution, and from their point of view, fundamentalists would take over. And so first of all, they didn't understand the dynamics of the Iranian revolution. And so it was a black and white categorization of the Muslim world. So when the Taliban came in, they never quite understood the reasons behind how the Taliban took over. They did not even understand the Afghan culture. They did not understand the difference between the urban culture in Afghanistan, especially Kabul, and they didn't understand what the rural culture was, and especially the Pashtun rural culture. And so they didn't understand when the Taliban took over what were the circumstances in Afghanistan. No one went into the depth. And so it was a black and white. Taliban were these religious fundamentalists who hated women and so on, and didn't like girls' education. And so whenever they ask me questions about Afghanistan, they do not understand that from Pakistan's point of view, our number one priority is that whichever is the government in Afghanistan, Pakistan must have peaceful relationship with them, because we have a 2,500 kilometer border with them. We have 3 million Afghan refugees. And when the previous government was in power, we had 3 different terrorist groups operating from Afghanistan and operating in Pakistan. ISIL, TTP, and then of course the Baloch terrorists. So from Pakistan point of view, we want a stable Afghanistan. Whether it was the previous government or the Taliban government, we want stability. Afghanistan has been through 40 years of conflict, and the people of Afghanistan have suffered. Now, from the West point of view, when they talk about human rights, and especially women's rights, it would be much better if the West if they allowed the current Afghan government to come into the mainstream. By isolating them, they're actually removing every leverage they have on trying to influence them on human rights and specifically women's rights. So right now it's a black and white thing, you know. If you talk about the Afghan government, because Taliban are there, you are then also supposed to be endorsing the treatment, the girls not going to school. But clearly, I mean, any human society, everyone knows that without women's education, how can a society progress? I mean, in our government, my 3.5 years, we give special stipends to parents of poor girls in conservative areas to send their girls to school. We made 60% of the new schools we made were for girls so that we could encourage girls' education. Because simple, I mean, our biggest problem right now, just to divert, is our population growth rate. Now, every research shows that if you educate the girl child, if your women are educated, automatically the fertility rate comes down. And so, I mean, it is a necessity for Pakistan. You know, for our future, we must educate our women.
Concept, it's also surprising, if I add on the woman issue, that you come from a family in which your sisters are highly educated. They work for international organizations, they're doctors, they're engineers, they're economists. Yet you, and the PGI has done the largest ever mobilization in the history of Pakistan, the political mobilization of a woman. This is for the first time that hundreds of women in Pakistan's history have been arrested and are behind bars for purely political charges. Yet, your opponents very easily show you and portray you as an anti-woman character across the West, where I live right now.
I don't know, Mohit, I fail to understand that. I don't know. I think it's quite black and white because, you know, I have a very strong faith in God. I am a, practicing Muslim. And therefore, I think they just stereotype people that if you're a practicing Muslim and you have faith in God, then you automatically, then all the other things follow, that you must be, in the Western eyes, you must be against women, you must be sort of very against, you must be illiberal. Although in my opinion, actually my faith makes me very liberal. Liberal in the sense that, I believe in humanity. I believe, I again repeat, my God is God of all human beings, and my Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was a mercy for mankind to bring humanity together. So, and of course, I'm anti-war. I mean, I do not believe conflicts, military conflicts are a way of solving problems of this earth. So, but they categorize people, and I think that's the problem.
Thank you.
I think, Imran Khan, because your opponents always are spreading news about you being anti-woman, that's actually the campaign they run in the West, especially. But I also did some search, and they acknowledged that Imran Khan's secret weapon is the resilience of women in Pakistan. I feel that despite facing humiliation, what women have shown great strength against state oppression. We have seen since 9th of May or in last 15 months. And I feel that you are the only politician who speaks honestly, recognizing the vital role women play in governance and freedom. Many of your protests are attended by families, including women. However, women like Dr. They complain about they complain about Afghanistan's women, but they fail to speak about Dr. Yasmin Rashid, who is actually 73-year-old gynecologist and a cancer survivor who studied medicine in UK. She's facing terrorism charges and is unwell in jail since 11th May. Zataj Gul, whose house was actually nearly demolished by police, is now in hiding. Malika Bukhari, who left the UK to serve Pakistan, endured 17 days in jail, humiliating conditions until she denounced herself from PTI. And I also saw the Khadija Shah, a young designer who grew up in the USA but returned to serve Pakistan, has been imprisoned since May for exercising for only her fundamental right to protest. And I also saw Sheeli Mizari was rearrested 5 times within short span of 4 or 5 days, despite even having a protective bail from court. And list goes on, Sanam Javed, Ali Hamza, and many others are also facing similar circumstances. So the question is, why don't these institutions speak about Pakistani women, and what will you do to protect women from these draconian measures and terrorism laws when you come into power, which I'm keeping my finger crossed that you will.
Well, Safina, look, first of all, never in Pakistan's history have women been treated like the way they have been done in Pakistan, not just after the 9th of May, but last year, 25th of May, that was the first time we got a shock. The way the police attacked the women, the way they raided the houses in the middle of the night, and not caring that there were women in the house, because there's a lot of respect for women in our society. This is a big fallacy that, we treat women badly here. And I will explain where this comes from, but we respect our women. And so the idea of police barging into people's house in the middle of the night, not caring that the women in the house, breaking into bedrooms, beating up the men in front of the women, this has never happened in our country before. So that first time happened on the 25th of May. And after 9th of May, what they did to peaceful protesters, women protesting peacefully, what they did to them, the way they beat them up, there's a lot of footage on social media. And I thought they went out of the way to spread terror amongst the women. And then they jailed them. And you've named a few, but there's so many other women who you haven't named, but who have been living in terrible conditions within the jail. And the worst thing is, they have deliberately terrorized the women. So this whole movement of ours, which brought women into politics, first time you saw at such large numbers women taking part in protests, and women from all sections of the society. And suddenly when these images went out, not only women being beaten up on the streets, but then women put into jail, I mean, imagine how difficult it would be for the men folk to allow their women to go out who understand Pakistani culture. And answer to your second, and by the way, this has been deliberately done. In my opinion, the last by-election we won by a huge majority in Rajanpur. One of the main reasons was a huge turnout of women in the election. And I think they are going out of the way to actually depoliticize the women. I think this is a plot, because this goes against our religion, our culture, against everything we believe in. And just answer to your last question, look, the problem is in Pakistan is not about women being treated badly. The problem in Pakistan is a lack of rule of law. Powerful women in Pakistan, compared to poor men in this country, are at a great advantage. I mean, a powerful women in Pakistan from strong families can have things done here. But a man from a weak background has no access to justice. So basically, it boils down to rule of law. Rule of law, I repeat, it means bringing the powerful under the law and protecting the weak from the strong. That's what you call a rule of law. And that is really what I've been struggling for 27 years. And that is eventually what will protect the weaker section of the society, whether it is women, whether it is minorities, or whether are the poor men.
Thank you, Imran.
Thank you. Kansa, I wanted to ask, we've been speaking about misinformation a lot during this time, and I'm not sure if you remember this. I have my own story about misinformation, and that is that I was supposed to go on a comedy tour, and I did. It was my first comedy tour of Pakistan. It was in 2017. And when I started advertising that I was coming to Pakistan, it was Nawaz Sharif supporters spread the rumor on social media that I was your secret child in the West. I don't know if you have any idea about that. But that actually ended up on ARY and Geo News, like spoken about on the news. And I had to contact the Sharif administration to explain that I was not your son, so that my visa would be able to go through. And they ended up calling the embassy in the U.S. I got my visa. I went to the airport, and then on the flight to Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif was removed from office. And so, in a way, Nawaz Sharif's last act of corruption was getting me my visa to go to Pakistan.
Jeremy, look, the problem is when you have people desperate to cling to power, because power for them means two things. Power for them means making money and stashing it abroad because they can't afford to keep the money in the country. Because when you make billions, if you keep it in the country, it gets discovered, so you have to send it abroad. So you do twice as much damage to the country when you launder the money out of the country. And Nawaz Sharif and these two families, this is what they've been doing for 30 years. And by the way, they blame each other for money laundering too. So it's not just us calling them. And secondly, the next problem is how to protect that corruption money. So that becomes the second thing. That's how they damage the country even more. Now they want to protect the money. So protecting the money means they must stay in power, because only in power can they protect the money. So this whole exercise of them conspiring with the ex-army chief to topple my government, I mean, their main interest was how would they get immunity from corruption cases. And that's exactly what they did the moment they came into power. First thing they did was they passed a legislation in Parliament. And it is incredible that such a legislation could be passed, where by law they managed to get rid of, they got immunity from the corruption cases of at least $5 billion, 1,100 billion rupees. So they passed this law and they were able to get away from these corruption cases. By the way, these corruption cases were made against them when they were in power, not during my time. So this is the problem. And by the way, Jeremy, this is the problem the entire developing world faces. Today, countries are poor not because of lack of resources. They are poor because they don't have rule of law. And a symptoms of not having rule of law is corruption, and corruption of the powerful. And that's what destroys a country, because, according to the United Nations Secretary General's panel, which is called the FACT-I panel, made up of economists who researched over a year to find out why were the poor countries getting poorer and rich getting richer. And the main finding is that every year, now listen to this, $1.7 trillion, $1,700 billion every year leave the developing world into offshore tax havens or into Western capitals. So $1.7 trillion moves from the poor countries to the rich countries and offshore accounts from the corrupt ruling elites. So this is how countries are getting poorer, because they are being robbed by their own elites. It's like if people might not know this, might not have read it in history, the greatest transfer of wealth took place when the East India Company conquered India. And from 1757 onwards, when they conquered India in 1757, India had 23% of the world GDP. And from then onwards, for 150 years, they transferred the wealth of India, was creamed off and taken off to Britain. And Britain had 3 or 4% of the world GDP when they conquered India. When they left India, Britain had 22 or 23% of world GDP, and India was left with 3 to 4% of the world GDP. So, they robbed the country. It's exactly what the ruling elites of the developing world are doing right now. They are siphoning off the money, and they end up and unfortunately, the powerful countries, rich countries, don't do anything to stop this plunder.
You're speaking about the rule of law in Pakistan. Of course, the West prides itself on our rule of law. But I was thinking about how the idea of rule of law predates the West. You find it in Roman law and Christianity and Islam. That it's not some idea that's sort of foreign to Islamic countries. It's actually something that is at the source of that.
Look, Jeremy, in the Islamic tradition, there were over 140,000 messengers of God sent to mankind over thousands of years. And every messenger of God, the common message was justice. One of our great scholars, Ibn Khaldun, he was considered the father of modern history. According to him, he said that my whole study of Islam brings me to just one point, that the whole purpose of the Almighty sending man to earth is to establish justice. So whenever during human history, the societies that had a better justice system always prospered. So it is connected to prosperity. So justice brings you rights. Rights gives you freedom, and free and stable societies then become prosperous. So hence, if you look at the table of rule of law index, out of the 140 countries, the top 15 countries which have the best rule of law are the most prosperous. And the bottom 15 countries which do not have rule of law are the poorest. So it is directly connected to prosperity.
Hansa, can I jump in for short questions? Because then I have to leave because I'm doing a house search and I'm called for an appointment. Hansa, I am surprised also that the way the media has been treated, the way Shahid Arshad Sharif has been murdered. Imran Khan is missing now for 65 days. Look at Sabir Shakar, myself, Shaheen Sabai, Bajat Saeed, we all have been registered FIRs for terrorism. Yet the impression of the Western media is, and I think also Jeremy should comment on it, is somehow the other that you were also as harsh to media. Not a single journalist was arrested in your time. There were no FIRs against the journalists. The journalists were not abducted and detained under your government. Neither are you able to explain that situation, nor is anyone understanding the word. There is a sea difference. Look at myself, look at Sabir Shakar, look at Shaheen Sabai, look at Jahat Saeed, look at the poor Arshad Sharif, look at his family, look at Imran Riaz. Yet they're blaming you for cracking down on media. I mean, how do you explain that?
Well, I think, Moeed, there's a term called moral equivalence, where they equate two unequal situations and actually protect the real aggressor. So, this idea that, some journalists might have suffered during our time, 3.5 years, and because of that, then the whole crackdown, I mean, what crackdown? Media is totally muzzled today. I mean, the media is totally controlled. There is no freedom. Under General Musharraf, and I don't know whether you remember, General Musharraf, the media was liberal compared to what is going on right now. So
100%.
it is completely controlled today. I mean, not just that the four of you have left the country, not just that Arshad Sharif was murdered after having to, because of threats to his life after leaving. I mean, what about the 4 or 5 senior journalists who were roughed up and beaten up in Pakistan? I mean, senior journalists like Ayaz Amir, like Sami Ibrahim, like Ghulam Hussain. I mean, these guys were just roughed up within Pakistan and threatened. So, I mean, this is unprecedented what is going on, the sort of crackdown. And yes, you're absolutely right. Sometimes they bring out some sort of human rights watch or some report or some international journalism who might have mentioned few journalists got a raw deal. But by the way, I looked at all there were 10 cases, so I actually had it investigated. There are 10 cases. And all of them, there were 3 of them which has to do with security, where the military establishment directly spoke to the media owners in 3 or 4 cases. There were one case which we were unfairly blamed because the channel, this one guy, his viewership dropped. And there was only one case that came to me, and that was about Matiullah Jan. And when I found out that he had been picked up, the next day we had him released. But you cannot compare what is going on. I mean, there is just no comparison between then and now.
I would like to add actually, Imran Khan, thank you for answering Dr. there are more than 40 cases, 40 individual cases registered against journalists. There are 40 members of journalists from Karachi, from Punjab, from Lahore, from Peshawar, and from Balochistan. And if you calculate only Balochistan, there are more. But I have a question, as Dr. May said about media, that the rape incident actually happened. If you remember, Dr. May, the rape incident on the motorway during Imran Khan's news sparked international outrage. But you know, the Human Rights Commission in Pakistan took quite active measures to seek justice on the times. But when I look at now, in early February this year, a woman was assaulted in F9 Park, Islamabad. Media discussions on the matter were completely banned by camera, and our human rights bodies appeared to remain silent, like there was no peep. Just recently, yesterday, there was a news about another rape occurred in Mark Mahib's in Islamabad, and that actually raises concern about the potential compromises like our human rights institutions in Pakistan and media have made. Is there really are the human rights organizations and the media in Pakistan is completely compromised? Because what I heard, okay, Imran Khan's name or PTI leadership cannot be mentioned in TV, but other than that, can all these crimes is also banned? And why actually human rights organizations are silent? Why there is no beat against those things?
Well, look, Safina, look. Unfortunately, the media, and I'm talking about our own media, and then I'm talking about the Western countries, two different things. Our own media is unfortunately controlled by the media owners, the bosses. And the media bosses have huge business interests. I mean, they're interested not just running a media house, they have other business interests. And so for those other business interests, which actually is what brings them most of their money, they are willing to compromise on the freedom of media if those business interests are threatened. We never did that. In our time, the media, if you look at the media, majority of the coverage was against PTI, my government. I mean, we had a real problem with the media. In fact, the problem was that there was real libelous stuff on the media. And even I, as a Prime Minister, I had to go to court. And yet, in my 3 years, I never got justice. Whereas in Britain, I've been in a libel case, a very famous one, and within 1.5 years, the case was decided. So anyway, I couldn't get justice, and we felt there was a lot of reporting, a lot of fake news, and we tried to bring legislation to control fake news, by the way, which is a problem all over the world because social media is a new phenomena. But unfortunately, I found that the media then and the human rights organizations, were very vocal at the time. But now, with a complete clamp down on human rights, I'm afraid there's not much, hardly any response from them. But about the Western countries, I find that, they talk about human rights when it suits their interests. But right now, I mean, all the talk about democracy, human rights, and so on, it's only reserved for, China and Russia, when something happens in Hong Kong or Uyghurs or something to do with the Russian dissidents. But what is happening right now, there's hardly any condemnation from any of the powerful Western countries who claim, that they are the, their professed aims are promoting democracy and human rights.
Yeah, that actually surprises me a lot. Thank you, Imran Khan.
Chairman, this is Atif. First of all, thank you very much for accepting my request and joining us at Twitter Space today. I'm really grateful to Jeremy and Safina for organizing this event, as well as our social media team headed by Gibran Ilyas, Imran Hamid, because without our social media, all this our political movement, our struggle, all these events couldn't have been possible. And then, a friend like Dr. Mohit Pirzada, a mentor, who has always been our biggest support, especially during the last 13 months. I don't have any question. It's just I want to bring it to your notice. Alhamdulillah, we have support among 98% of Pakistani Americans. And along with that, we have started getting huge support among the Muslim Americans as well. And on September 2nd, we are planning one of the biggest events on which you will be speaking to over 15,000 Muslim American gathering. And also, I want to make a commitment, like you always say, La ilaha illallah. And inshallah, we will fight till the very end. We will not leave you alone. All the overseas Pakistanis are with you. And after that, Gibran Ilyas, I think he's also at the airport and he's about to check in. He also wants to make an announcement. Gibran bhai, if you can unmute yourself and make that announcement, because it's a very important announcement. Thank you.
Sure. Many thanks, Adil. Kansab, you had said that it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. So what we have done in social media is, we've heard of citizens journalism, but what we have done is this is going to be the first ever citizens documentary. I think it's going to be one of the biggest. So what we're asking people who have footages in high definition from March 2022, when the whole movement started for Hakiki Azadi, just check my pin tweet. feedback@insaf.pk is the email address to email if you want to be part of that project. Inshallah, it will be one of the greatest documentaries ever, because everybody will be part of it. Kansab, my short question is, you once mentioned that PMLN, they're not educated, nor they try to get education. So just recently, Khwaja Asif has blamed, put allegations on Shaukat Khanum Hospital again. I say we let them, because every time he does that, we get record donations. So this is what we're seeing this time around. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, look, Gibran, these people are discredited. They have been in power for 30 years. Everyone knows everything about them. And the last 14 months, they have completely destroyed themselves, because they came in on the pretext that they were experienced in dealing with the economy. And they have completely, our economy has never been in a worse shape than it is right now. And this is, despite what was called the commodity super cycle, when post-COVID, the international commodity prices had gone through the roof, which is when we were in power. And now they are down by 35%. And despite that, you find that inflation is unprecedented in Pakistan's history. So number one was inflation, number two was fixing the economy. The economy has nosedived in Pakistan. We almost defaulted on our loans, and that would have really set the country back. So people now, the reason why they are scared of holding elections, and the reason why they only want elections, is when they know that PTI is completely hamstrung by the establishment and I'm in jail or disqualified, because